Okay, very good afternoon, everybody, and welcome on this lunch panel during the first week of the virtual ECPR Winter School. In the session today, we will talk about research challenges and opportunities in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think I don't have to convince you that this pandemic has huge repercussions for us as human beings, as political and social scientists. I mean, you just look at the way in which we are gathering here today. We are all sitting behind our screens, many of us probably with a sandwich or some lunch. And of course, it would have been much nicer if we could have been together physically, right? And I feel this especially because this year, before the pandemic started, well, we planned that the physical event of the winter school of ECPR would take place in Leuven at my home university. So we had to postpone this, and I'm well, very sorry that I can't meet you in person, and I really hope that we will be able to meet next year when we will hopefully be able to have a physical meeting in Leuven for the winter school. And well, if this is the case, let's take the opportunity then to meet and to have a drink and grab some food together. Okay. Now, apart from the social impact of the pandemic, there are of course numerous challenges for our research as well. We have all been confronted with fieldwork that was interrupted or stopped. We had to juggle various responsibilities in the work and the realm of the family. We had to take care of our beloved ones while keeping up our duties as academics as well. And so well, a lot of challenges that face us. But at the same time, I think we can say that the pandemic also created opportunities for us as political and social scientists. And I think more than ever before, it is recognized that we need all kinds of knowledge on the behavior of humans, on social behavior, and that the pandemic is not only a health crisis, but a societal crisis, and that we need political scientists and social scientists doing research to get us out of this crisis. And so, well, it is an open discussion how successful we were as a field to make an impact and to share our knowledge and to generate the necessary knowledge during this crisis. But at least today, we have a couple of speakers that did a very good job and that, well, make attempts to see the opportunities in this pandemic and that are willing to talk to us about the impact and of the crisis and the opportunities this crisis generated for the research. So I'm very happy that we have three speakers: Olga Löblová, Kostas Geminis, and Dorsch. Dorsch. I don't know if it's Michael or Michael. My apologies for that. Each of the speakers, they have prepared a talk, and I suggest that I give the floor to you in that order, that you, well, talk us a bit through your experiences with the crisis and the opportunities it created. And well, there's also opportunity for interaction with the people present here. So if you have questions, feel free to write them down or to remember them, and you will have the opportunity after each speaker to ask the questions and to interact, okay? But for the moment, it's probably best if we all keep the microphones muted to avoid background noise, okay? Before I give the floor to the speakers, a message from ECPR that is important, that was also put in the chat, is that this session is recorded, and so that you're free to keep cameras off and remove or edit your name if you prefer not to be visible in the recording. Okay, is that good? Well, then I would like to first give the floor to Olga Löblová. Olga is a research associate at Cambridge University, and she was awarded a Wellcome Research Fellowship in Humanities and Social Science. And at Cambridge, she works as a political scientist in the field of health policy, right? And this is particularly a topic that has become very prominent and very important over the past months. So I'm looking forward to hear, Olga, what you have to share with the participants in this panel. So the floor is yours. I don't know if you want to share some slides or not. I mean, you're free to do whatever you want in that respect.
Thank you very much, and thank you also very much to ECPR and to Leuven for inviting me to this panel. I'll have the I'll enjoy the occasion today of speaking without PowerPoint, so it's a rare treat, and I hope that you'll be able to follow nonetheless without visual cues. What I want to talk about today is a very simple thing: what it's like to work on a topic that suddenly becomes hot, because this is what happened to me with the pandemic. So as background on myself, I have a public policy PhD from CU, but I've been working on health policy specifically since my first MA thesis. And it's my kind of only real passion. I also worked in it as a practitioner for a short period of time, and then as a consultant at times during my PhD. And I've been working on relatively niche topics. So my main topic is pricing and reimbursement of medicines and other health technologies. And this is very nerdy stuff, right? The topic of my postdoc for the past 3 years has been cancer screening governance, which is one thing, but also regulation of molecular diagnostics. And that's literally a niche of a niche of a niche. Right. And I've been thinking, there were times during my postdoc, during the first 2 years, when I was thinking, why am I doing this? This is it's not leading to as many publications as I would expect. And it's kind of hard to communicate the importance of this topic to other people. I'm in a department of sociology, and this is really a niche of a niche of a niche. I'm a political scientist. I'm trying to communicate this to political scientists. It was difficult. But obviously, molecular diagnostics suddenly became, and regulation and governance of molecular diagnostics suddenly became very hot when the whole world suddenly learned about what is a PCR test, what is an antigen test, right? What is the difference between specificity and sensitivity of a diagnostic test? So at the beginning of the pandemic, I was just thinking, okay, my time has come professionally. But obviously, as for anybody, I imagine, or most people probably, personally, this has been not always an easy time. It does affect the way you experience the, to quote the title of the session, which I believe is Opportunities and Challenges of COVID-19, in very complex and sometimes unexpected and surprising ways that probably require, therapy to work through, rather than a lunch panel. Personally, for me, not having the capacity to realize all the opportunities that I saw and running out of steam kind of midway through this year has been a real issue. And I do hope that the future will be kind on us about this. So I want to tell you 3 things about what it's like when your topic suddenly becomes hot. First, how to capitalize on it, on the topic becoming hot. Second, how not to let it take over your normal research agenda. And I actually think that I have more questions about this to more senior and more experienced colleagues than answers. And finally, a couple of words about how it feels to be suddenly hot. So that's the talk for today. So how to capitalize on your topic suddenly becoming very relevant and visible. I see a couple of ways. The first and most obvious one would be to publish more, right? And to publish on the topic specifically, to ride the waves of publications. If you can immediately start writing, that's great, but publications obviously have a very long lead time. So I think preprints in this case are a great option. And I'm pretty sure that Michael will tell us more about that, or I hope. To share a not so successful story, I have a paper that's formally still in review, but it must be killed at some point, on lessons learned from the first 5 countries that eased lockdowns in Europe from April. It just, or April, May. It just took a long time to get it out, and the journal can't find reviewers, and this is definitely no longer relevant today, right? So it could have had more impact as a preprint, even if it got never published. But now it's still hanging in somewhere in the void. Next, grants. Everybody will be applying for these hot topic grants, for COVID grants at the moment. But if you've been working on the topic before, you have the credibility and the track record. And I think that this is what funders like. Obviously, I don't know, but I can tell you that that I got 5 grants this year. 3 of them are on COVID. They are small grants, or well, one of them was larger, but 2 of them are small, kind of 10, 12, 15,000 pounds grants. But I think I got them because I have the credibility about the topic with my boss, some of them, or most of them actually. But what I have to say from this experience is that one has to be careful about the timelines. So these kind of special rapid calls can have shorter timelines for delivery, and it's very easy to overpromise, like you would in normal times when you have 2 years to do a small project or small-ish project, and then you can't deliver. And this is probably my biggest kind of the thing that keeps me awake at night, is that it is very difficult to deliver on all of these projects and to deliver in the timeline that you would expect of yourself. But also, one of these projects was a largish collaborative grant funded by an external funder, and the external funder said, okay, you're proposed to do this in a year, which is already pretty ambitious. We'll give you the money, but do it in half a year. And so obviously we accepted, but it's just it was very difficult, and it is. And as a result, I actually kind of burnt out in August and in the fall, because I had been working until then at kind of 120% capacity without any breaks, which is very easy to do if this is the moment you've been preparing for, you've been training for, the work is interesting, it's relevant for the world, and you also can't do much else in your life, right? So it's kind of easy to fall into that trap. And for me, it's very hard to now cope with the knowledge that I am under delivering, that I will be delivering late on something. This has never happened to me, but it's not a human capacity to do otherwise. My other colleagues have advice on how to cope with that. I'm a taker here. Another point on how to capitalize on jobs is, could be jobs. That's job applications and opportunities. And that's a tough one, because I imagine that there's probably going on in academia. I've seen a couple more specific calls on health policy than before. It's good. Next week, I'm actually having a job interview at a university that has published a call looking for somebody for 3 years in a row. This is the 3rd year that I'm applying, and only now I'm getting shortlisted. So I don't know if there's a change, if it's the 5 grants that caught their attention, or if it's the fact that they're now that they probably hired somebody who did environmental policy in the last calls and not actually health. It was just one of their priorities, and now it could be a stronger priority. Another thing is that using this to get larger grants might be a good idea, because possibly grant-based postdocs are going to be the only academic career option for a while now, or maybe forever, who knows. So it might be a good idea anyways. Another way of capitalizing on your topic becoming hot could be public engagement. And by that, I mean kind of talking to the media, popular pieces, blogs, preprints, I think, are also a form of public engagement. The downside of this is, well, the upside is that it is really relevant and you're finally, you can contribute something to the world. The downside of this is that it takes a lot of time and energy, and career rewards are in many countries uncertain. The UK, where I'm now, rewards engagement, public engagement, but also a very specific kind of engagement. And it's anyway not really expected of very early career scholars. But still, I think that it's good to show. There might also be rewards of increased visibility to you if you're opting for a non-academic career. So, but really sector specific. I think ultimately this is also a bit of your personal decision on what you think academics should be doing and what your job as a PhD student, as an early career researcher, as an older researcher is. And finally, you can also capitalize on your topic becoming hot in teaching. And I think we have an obligation to our students to, if you're teaching on a related topic, which you probably are, if you know it well, to use what's happening, right? This is the major issue in our lives right now. But it's also tricky because maybe some of the students are personally affected. So this is a balancing act. Like the number of dead people is a major public policy problem, and you need to treat it as a public policy problem in your teaching. But also some of our students, might have somebody who is dying or has died. They might be affected by it. And I think often we forget about this, and maybe we'd do well to take advice from fields that regularly teach on traumatic or traumatizing topics. So it is something to think about. Practically, this is something that's similar to what I found was a problem when I was teaching EU affairs. Preparing for classes and staying up to date can take over your entire day. So that's also, I don't know how to cap that, but I think we're all facing that problem now. Okay. How to not let it take over your entire normal research agenda. I think it's impossible because it's anyway, if there is such a major event happening like COVID, anyway, what we think about all the time. It's probably similar to what happened to people who were working on Brexit in 2015, 16, or in kind of European disintegration, that suddenly Brexit happens. So my question really is, should you maybe let it take over? This is clearly a major event, but will it be large enough to sustain a research agenda in the future for years to come? Yeah, I'd like to hear other opinions. But in fact, you always have other things that need to be finished. There's the dissertation, there's a paper that you promised for a special issue, there's a grant application, there's, so it is a problem. And finally, how it feels kind of emotionally to be working on a topic that is suddenly becomes big. You do, I think, have this reaction of like, yay, I'm relevant, finally. Finally, it's not a niche of a niche of a niche, but also you become one of many all of a sudden. And especially if the topic was really niche, right? That's good because you have more people to play with and to talk to, a larger literature to talk to. But it's also bad in the sense that you're no longer special, and many of the new people in the field surely do it better than you, and competition is greater. So you do feel a bit like, I don't know, like the Pete Best of your topic. Like you were in the Beatles before they got famous. Like, what is happening now? But on the other hand, I think I don't actually have any advice as such, except the one that you should not let yourself burn out, and you should not destroy yourself over your topic, even if it becomes a major social issue. Just because you, until that point, had been one of 10 people on this planet or 100 working on this topic, and it's suddenly very, very important, you don't need to work 24/7, or definitely not for months on end, to save the world. The fact that there are new people coming into the field, that's actually good. You've contributed, you can contribute as much as you feel is necessary, but then at some point you probably have to slow down and let collective knowledge fill in the gaps. That's all I have to say. More questions than answers, I think.
That's a lot to say. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences and insights. This was very relevant. I can imagine that there's questions for you, and you also asked several questions to the audience. So I would like to open the floor. We have a bit of time for some discussion. Is there somebody who would like to intervene? You can raise your hand. Well, just clicking the raise your hand button. Maybe while people are formulating a question or thinking about a question, I have a question myself. So you refer to the preprints and the publication practices. And I mean, I'm not inside this hot area that you described right now, but a bit more from a distance. I sometimes have the concern that as a discipline, we are suddenly changing our publication practices. We suddenly start to publish in other journals, different formats, and sometimes I have some concern that maybe well, we are giving some of our identity and also some of the good parts of our publication practices. But this is a bit more from a distance. I don't know, you're being inside it, if you would agree with this or see it completely differently, that we can learn a lot from the publication practices, more of the medical science.
I don't know, but I am at the intersection, or I am actually, I think by now, sadly, less of a political scientist in terms of my publications and more of some kind of a health policy, interdisciplinary health policy person. And that's, and there the practices, some of this literature is very, very practical and practice oriented, right? And so if you do research like many of my colleagues did, or even the kind of research that we did on the reopening, you do have people, you produce something, and now you submit it in May, and it's been stuck in review because the journal can't find reviewers. Yeah, it's all been in vain. So I understand what you think. It's a different thing for things where you really need to think about them, maybe get some distance from the topic, to kind of more practice and policy oriented topics where the benefit could outweigh the costs of doing things quickly. But I don't know, maybe I don't really I have never done a preprint in my life. So it's just now I see the benefits more than before.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at the lists of participants.
I also see a raised hand from Michael.
Okay, so let's start with Michael. Michael, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I can comment briefly on two things that Olga mentioned. The first, I think, is should you let it take over your research ambitions and your research trajectory? And I would say no, simply because in my experience doing research on the COVID crisis, I tended to view it as an application of the kind of research that I'm interested in, right? So I'm interested in kind of comparative political institutions, and I viewed the COVID crisis through that lens. Yeah. So for me in particular, it was an interesting application of something that I was already doing using other types of data. Yeah. In a way, like I still don't even, like if somebody asks me what my 3 research areas are, I don't even mention COVID. It's like, it's just an application of one of my research interests. The second thing that I'd like to comment on is the preprints versus peer review. So one of the papers that I'll discuss very briefly, we did it very fast, and we put it as a working paper, a preprint, in the public domain after one round of kind of peer review from people within our institutions. And Levi in particular, I'd like to thank for being one of the people that took the time to review a very rough draft of what we had done. And we put it out there before, kind of like right at the same time as we were submitting it to a journal. In the past, I'd never done that. So I would wait until I got a response for review and revise and resubmit before I would put something out into the public domain, because I didn't want somebody to take the idea, yeah? But as Olga said, we put it under review, and it's been under review for 6 months now, and the review process has been totally stalled. But at the same time, it's had an impact as a preprint. So yeah, I'm not really sure exactly what the downside is, in a way, of putting stuff out as a preprint and using it also to submit for publication. I think you can do both. But in the past, I personally had been shy of putting stuff out in the public domain before I had some kind of response from a journal.
Thank you for this intervention. I see that, Kostas, that you're raising your hand as well. And maybe I will take the opportunity just to introduce you as a speaker at the same time. I guess that you want to react on what is being said right now, but maybe you can do your intervention at the same time. So Kostas Geminis is senior researcher in quantitative methods at the Max Planck Institute for the study of societies. And he's also a teacher. He will teach in the second week of this ECPR virtual event. But so, Kostas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, just quickly on these preprints and publications. I'm a little surprised to hear that people haven't been thinking about preprints before the COVID crisis. I mean, I've been doing this ever since I was a graduate student more than 10 years ago. So my first ever paper, well, not first, but first serious paper, I put it out as a working paper in some working paper series because, and my motivation back then was that it has changed now with online publication, but back then it was that you would submit something to a journal, they would accept it, and then it will be only a year and a half to 2 years that they would actually publish it. And now the turnaround with this online publication is much quicker, I guess. But the motivation back then was to have it online earlier, as soon as possible, and get citations, and get people to other people to know of your work. But there is also the issue of being more interdisciplinary if you want to do anything about any work on the pandemic. And again, my experience in this regard has been more, let's say, newbie. I mean, I wrote something, and which I will also speak in my talk about surveys. And I thought, okay, I can send this to a public health, interdisciplinary public health kind of journal. And then they have like their own, because they are classified under medical journals, they have their own rules about citations and about how to write an abstract and what to put in an abstract and how to structure the paper and so on. So I spent like, I don't know, like something like two weeks to get the paper in the format they wanted, to put all the information they wanted, and then I send it, and I get desk rejections. It's like, it's too early to publish anything on COVID. That was like very early. That was like last year in May. So that was just like, 3 months after this whole thing really took off. So then I say, okay, I change again the format, I change everything, and send it to a psychology journal. And then I get another rejection. I think it was a desk rejection as well. And then I was like, okay, I changed it again, and then I send it to some sort of more generalist kind of journal. And then, after a couple of months, I get another desk rejection with like some arguments there. And then, guess what? In the end, the paper got accepted in after a few rounds of review in a political science journal. So, I mean, I thought that, I could, do a public health kind of a paper. No, you cannot do it like that. You have to, know the tricks or whatever. And obviously the trick in that case was that they don't publish stuff early. They wait for a phenomenon to have its go. And then after a couple of years, they do like, what was the issue with that or something like this. And of course, if you're not a psychologist, you cannot just go in a psychology journal like that, even if it's like not like a generalist psychology journal. And then in the end, I ended up in a political science journal. Okay, so but what was this paper about, and what was that I wanted to talk about today? So I'm just going to take only a couple of minutes, only a few minutes, and I have like a slides. I don't know if you're, I think you can see that, right?
Yes, we can see it, yeah.
So let me see if I can do like presentation. Yeah, that's good. So so what the paper was based on the survey. So my motivation for getting into jumping the COVID bandwagon was I was just finishing a project, a personal project at Max Planck on voting advice applications, and it's been almost 10 years that I'm been working on this area. And I proposed to write a book which would complete the project, and then I was looking to have something new. And I was always interested in conspiracy theories, how conspiracy theories work in politics, and what are the implications, and so on. And then in the beginning of the pandemic, I thought, yeah, I'm not gonna do any surveys around that. That's not really my area. I don't want to get involved. This is a serious issue. I don't want this to mess up with my professional ambitions and so on. But then I very, very early on, all these conspiracy theories about COVID started circulating. So like, okay, if I want to sort of trial this new research agenda and see if there's something actually for me there before I just finish the other project, I was looking to do a survey. And of course, if you want to do a survey on any topic, really, I mean, there are various options. I mean, there's the European Social Survey, which we, together with Levy, we submitted the proposal at the ESS. They have a COVID-19 module, and they accepted some of our questions on conspiracy theories and so on. And this is, I think, the round 10 is on the field as we speak, and the data should be available next year or something, or later this year, I guess. So there is the option of going for an established survey, face-to-face, cross-sectional survey, and see if they have any sort of module where they would accept questions on an issue which is very hot at the moment. And the same goes for online panels. For example, the Geminis panel has a special survey on COVID. Same goes for the LIS panel. They have a COVID-19 module. And the advantage with these online panels is that you get all the data, because it's a panel, it's a long-standing panel. You get the same respondents. So you have like a wealth of information about these respondents from previous waves of the panel. But yeah, if you're sort of trialing to see, is this really something for me? I mean, it's for me, it was like sort of jumping on the bandwagon and saying like, look, let me take this opportunity to test something that I really wanted to do for some time. Yeah, maybe this is not, and especially if it's not your area, really, it's probably not the best idea to start from these surveys. And then maybe you could do something with like one of these commercial access panels. And I can't remember, I think it was Respondi at some point early in the COVID-19 crisis, they had like call for free surveys. I can't remember if it was Respondi or Hugo or someone else. So you could actually send 10 questions or something like that, or like 20 minutes with a few respond, like 1,000 respondents, something like that. And then, after a while, those panels developed their own, sort of survey instruments to track attitudes, and then you could ask for your questions to be included and so on. But again, if you don't have the funding and that sort of you're not willing to get into that sort of trouble, you may want to do something quicker. And there are things like Amazon MTurk, Amazon Mechanical Turk, or something called Appen. It used to be called Figure 8. Before that, it was called Crowdflower. And basically, these are like micro jobs, or like it's this gig economy kind of thing, where you post in their website, in their system, a task, usually some sort of annotation for machine learning projects, but it could also be a survey. You could say, I have this survey experiment, or I have this survey. Could you please get some people from your workers to fill in this survey? And then they just send you the data. So that's a very quick and easy way to get participants to participate in your survey, to answer your survey questions, or like do a survey experiment. And you can embed videos and lots of stuff. So they're quite flexible with what you can do in there. But again, maybe you don't want to do that because it's a bit complex to set up, and there are all sorts of ethical issues with people working to make a living in these companies. So you might want to, you might have second thoughts. And then what I did, and what I wanted to also to draw your attention, because I guess the other options are well known, is that you can actually do a survey by advertising on social media. And there's Facebook and Twitter and other platforms as well. And for example, on Twitter, you can have like a tweet which includes a link to your survey, and you can draw people's attention with some sort of message, and then you can ask Twitter to show this tweet on people's feeds as sponsored content, like an advertisement, and you specify how much money you want to spend on this, and then you just do your online survey and then just advertise it via Twitter. And Facebook is more sophisticated, because you can target specific countries or regions or specific individuals based on their age, gender, or interests. And you run an ad, and this is, I mean, the survey I've done was in Greece, so it's probably all Greek to you, but you can get the idea that you have a picture and you have a message, and at the bottom there's the link. And in this particular case, it was like implementation of Lime survey. We have Lime survey set up with partnership with University of Göttingen in an institution called GVDG. So, and that, if you see this ad appeared in people's feeds as sponsored content, as you can see on top. And I just made up a Facebook page called COVID-19 Research, and I put my credit card there and everything. And of course, I had to get all sorts of permissions and ethics and so on. But then that in the end, that was like an online survey, a simple online survey, which I just wanted to test some questions on COVID-19 conspiracy theories in Greece. And I ran this on Facebook. And I chose Facebook because of this, of their platform being very flexible in terms of what you can target. And just some results. I've done a couple of surveys there, and the first one, it was shown to a little bit more than 300,000 people in Greece. According to Facebook, there are 6.5 million accounts, Facebook accounts increased by people over 18. So that was shown to a little bit more than 300,000 accounts. And a little bit more than 13,000 people clicked on this ad. And eventually 8,000 something reached the survey, and 6,625 went forward after the consent page. And in the end, I got like 5,155 completed questionnaires. That should be questionnaires, they're not surveys. And that was quite good. I mean, it was like more than enough for what I wanted to test. And I had like variation in terms of age, gender. I put standard European social survey questions, so I could have a benchmark of where my respondents were coming from. And that didn't look too bad. And what I was impressive and why I wanted to present this as an opportunity in this talk is that the cost of one fully completed questionnaire was 6 cents. Okay, now if you've done surveys online or otherwise, you cannot beat this price. 6 cents per questionnaire, per completed questionnaire, which included, it was 18 minutes. I think the average response was 18 minutes. So that was like more than a survey experiment. That was like a good survey. And excluding VAT, which might vary from country to country, or you might get exemptions if you're an educational institute or whatever. The cost was 6 cents. So that was like, I did this with 300 euros basically. Huh. So, you know, you cannot do much with 300 euros. So, and I advertised it as such to Max Planck, to the institute. That's like, you know, would you like to throw 300 euros and see what happens? And it's not much. I think they actually gave me 500 euros, but you know, I didn't spend everything. And I thought after that was live for, I think, a week. Okay, so in a week I got these responses. Yeah. So yeah. So okay, these are the opportunities. Okay, so there's a hot topic, and you want to do something quick. You want to test some questions. You want to do a survey experiment quick. There is a lot of interest on this topic, obviously on social media, so people are going to click. And because they're going to click, it's going to cost you very little money. So you're going to get, you know, a lot from your money. So this is the opportunity, because you know you can do these surveys on Facebook anytime. But if it's on a hot topic, it will be very cheap. It can be very cheap. And you know, that's better than your average crowd worker sample. I mean, it's not just like educated people who have like a degree. Pretty much everyone is on Facebook these days. You have, you know, very old people. You have, you know, pensioners. You have not so many young people. But when you do a survey on Facebook, you also get advertised on Instagram. So it's the same with the same price. You get 2 in the price of 1. So, and I assume that Instagram is more younger people. It's quicker than the getting a probability sample. I mean, we've done the proposal for the ESS about 10 months ago, and we're not going to get the data until a year from now. So, you know, the turnaround it could be like 2 years. Of course, you cannot compare the, you know, the European Social Survey with just something I've done on Facebook. But you know, if you just want to test very quickly something, there are other options than going, you know, to the ESS or to one of these commercial access panels, which is also simpler than the cheaper than the average commercial panel online. But we have been seeing lately, the past 3 years, 3 years ago when I started doing, it was 3 years ago, it was about 3 years ago when I started doing surveys on through Facebook, there was no research on that, basically. So you could get a sample, and nobody actually researched what this was, what you were getting at. But now, after especially the last couple of years, there've been at least a dozen papers comparing samples derived from Facebook advertising to other kinds of samples. And what we notice is that we have a topical self-selection, which means that people who are interested in a specific topic, they're more likely to click. So you might, that could be good if you just want to reach a niche, like you're doing something like, you're trying to reach a hard to find group, and you can find this group in Facebook, on Facebook, and they will probably click on an ad because that's a very niche topic. But yeah, I mean, there might be, for example, biases. So if you want to correlate something with, for example, COVID-19 behavioral outcomes, if you're, wearing masks, so on, there might be some bias there, because there are specific kinds of people who would click on a survey about COVID. So if you have like some sort of conspiracy believers that they don't believe in this, they're less likely to click and therefore less likely to respond accordingly in certain questions. So that's what I wanted to say. Yeah, so if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Kostas. This was really, really useful to hear your experiences with data collection. Maybe one point that I would like to mention, I'm involved in the data collection for ESS Belgium, and well, the time frame you use, it might even be worse, because most countries still have to go into the field. So the pandemic, its opportunities, but also challenges, and that evidences the use of these online data collections. Okay, I think keeping an eye on the clock, it's best if we go to our third speaker for today. So Michael Dorsch, we already heard you briefly with an intervention, but Michael is Associate Professor of Public Policy at CEU and also instructor of the second week of this virtual event. Michael, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. But before I start on this, I would like to reiterate for the participants in this session what a good deal Kostas got. We did a survey on a different topic recently using Qualtrics, which is a third-party moderator, I guess you could say. And it was 150% more expensive. Just dramatically more expensive to do it that way. So it's a good methodological, I guess, tip that Kostas has given us. So I think I just want to briefly talk about 3 papers that we did over the course of the last year. So these papers, all 3 of them are with a Brazilian colleague of mine, Gabriel Cepaluni, who's in Sao Paulo. And each paper was with a different PhD student at CEU in the doctoral school at CEU, Reka, Semir, and Daniel. And I think maybe what you'll see when I kind of briefly outline these 3 papers is that, if you want to get something kind of done quickly that you can be confident in, my advice is to start simple. Yeah, if it's something that nobody has researched before, do something simple. Yeah, because you know that it's correct for the most part. You know that people will be able to understand it and ingest it outside of your own discipline, and you can do it fast with confidence. So we started very simple with Reka, and then kind of as you maybe continue working in an area such as COVID or whatever area you're interested in, gradually add nuance to it, develop the methodology deeper, look into mechanisms that are driving the relationship, and develop kind of the research. But if you want to get something out fast that you can be confident in, my advice is to start simple. So as I said, I'm kind of interested in comparative political institutions, and that was the lens through which I viewed our initial foray into COVID research. We wanted to know, quite simply, did democracies do better or worse than non-democracies? Yeah, and we got what we thought at the time was a counterintuitive result. Actually, no, democracies seemed to do worse than non-democracies on quite a few metrics related to COVID. And the more we started thinking about this, the more it became kind of obvious to us how that was working. And we started thinking about, well, the things that make democracies typically produce good outcomes in a time of crisis can be severe constraints. Yeah. And that I think is what I'd like to maybe discuss briefly with you today. So, at the time when all this was going on, I think, we looked at two examples as kind of, diametrically opposed as to how they dealt with the crisis. And they were also, quite opposite in terms of the political institutions that rule the country. So Singapore handled the crisis very well. The United States and certain states in particular certainly did not. Yeah, and one of our initial ideas was that, well, in more democratic countries, people, are protective of their civil liberties and are maybe going to be less likely to accept invasive regulations into their lives. And I think that these two photos kind of demonstrate that. So our focus in the first paper was just on the first 100 days, basically, because that's when we finished doing the analysis. So we did an analysis on the first 100 days of 2020, asking the very simple question, whether or not more democratic regimes fared better or worse than less democratic regimes. And on these four metrics, we found that democracies, or more democratic countries, I should say, fared worse on average. Greater per capita death tolls, sooner incidence of COVID deaths since first confirmed case, less stringent policy responses, and policy responses that were less effective in constraining or reducing the number of deaths. So in one of our follow-up projects, we gathered more data from the first, I guess, 250 days and confirmed our initial finding. So this figure is a snapshot from the same research question with updated data, at least according to this measure of democracy. More democratic countries are associated with more deaths. And this figure shows the effectiveness of policy. So what this is an interaction regression. And what we're showing you here is the marginal effect of an increase in policy stringency on death as a function of political regime. Yeah, so what you can see there is that relatively less democratic countries, when they increase their policy stringency, you see a reduction in death, but not necessarily in the most democratic countries. So that's interesting. We got that out really fast. And as I said, it's been, it's not published yet, but releasing it as a preprint to Olga's, well, I guess to Olga's initial question, but to Kostas's follow-up was actually a good idea in our case. so we added some nuance to it. Well, is this being driven by populist democracies, right? Is this, is Trump and Bolsonaro driving this whole story? And we found that actually it's not the case. And kind of in general, this question could be rephrased as are populists more damaging in democracies or non-democracies? Yeah. So this would be an example of, the second question is very general, right? But we had applied we use COVID-19 as a nice application of this question. And I should say that it was Levy that prompted us to do this follow-up study. So thank you to him. So show you just a couple of results here, and but before I introduce the third paper briefly and then wrap up. So if we look across political regimes and kind of correlate, this is VDEM's measure of populism. If we correlate VDEM's measure of populism with log per capita deaths, we see that populists do worse, yeah, averaged across democracies and non-democracies. What is interesting, though, is if we were to think about like splitting that sample up between democratic countries and non-democratic countries, and thinking if the effect of populism is different across those two types of political regimes. And here we see both. So the red dots are democracy data points, and the blue dots are non-democracy data points. We see that both types of political regimes exhibit a positive correlation between levels of populism and deaths, but the relationship is much kind of steeper for the non-democratic regimes. Yeah, so the initial kind of result that's critical well, that finds a positive correlation between democratic regimes and deaths cannot be explained away by looking or by looking at populists. In fact, the relationship between populism and deaths is stronger in non-democracies. Okay, so the third question then is, well, we wanted to look at policy responses, yeah, and from a political economy point of view, we wanted to look at what are some political constraints on government policy responses. And what we looked at in particular was geographic mobility. And actually, I guess this would be another maybe methodological suggestion for participants in this panel. We chose geographic mobility because we found a really a cool data set to work with. Yeah. So this data is metadata from smartphones. Yeah. So it's community level metadata from smartphones that kind of tells you on average how communities are moving around and what types of movements they're doing. So we came across this really cool data set, and we thought, okay, we'll investigate this. I'm going to skip that. And I think I'll maybe jump to the punchline, since I'm wary of the time. We were interested, and so this, I guess, is where we started getting a bit more sophisticated in the modeling. So we were interested in trying to establish a causal relationship between geographical mobility and government's policy responses to COVID. So we needed to use, we chose to use, I should say, an instrumental variable strategy. I'm not sure if the panel participants have, well, I know the panel participants have, but if all of the session participants are familiar with this. So instruments are variables that you use when you want to isolate one causal arrow between variables of interest. Okay, so we were interested in, does more geographical mobility have a causal impact on policy responses? Now, even if you lag geographical mobility, there's still a reverse causal kind of story that one can tell. People anticipate lockdowns, so they start moving around more before the lockdown. Yeah. So we wanted to rule that out. And we used an instrument to do so. We used rainfall. Now, why would climate data be interesting for this? Because it's pretty clear that rainfall has a direct impact on how much people are moving around. So we can be sure that it's a relevant instrument, but it's much harder to believe that the policy responses of governments are responding directly to changes in precipitation. So I'm basically not going to go through all of this because we have a paper that you can read about it in, and the time is up. So I'll just maybe conclude by saying, yeah, if you want to work on topics of the day, I think it's a good idea to start simple, get something out there, and start kind of adding layers of nuance and methodological sophistication to it as you progress through the research. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. I must say it's really impressive to see. I mean, you talked about the difficulties and the time limit, but it's really impressive to see how much interesting research you have out there in this short period of time. So congratulations on that.
Thanks.
We are running out of time, but I think we can take maybe a couple of minutes to see if there's questions or comments that somebody from the audience wants to make. You can use the raise hand button, or just open the microphone, given that it's not a huge group. I'm looking. I see no hands raised. Okay. Maureen, you raised your hand the first time as well. Then you did not have the opportunity, so please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for the papers. Very knowledge inspiring. I've learned so much. So I have a question regarding the Facebook survey, and it's related to validity. Considering how this survey is distributed to people, we don't know where they are, where they're taking it from. How can we be sure that their environment doesn't affect the validity of our claims, especially internal validity? That's what I'm asking in relation to for online surveys.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. I guess we can pass on this question to Kostas. Is that good? Fine for you, Kostas?
Yes, that's yes. Thanks. That very quickly. I mean, a survey, the validity of a survey done on Facebook, through Facebook, advertised through Facebook, is like the validity of any survey done online. Basically, you have to take the respondents' word that they completed the survey as they were supposed to, and they are answering truthfully. I mean, when it comes to the very basic demographics where the respondents come from, the survey will be advertised according to the what people have indicated in their profiles. So if you want to do a survey on women, and it will go only to persons that have said that they are female on Facebook. If they haven't declared their gender, or if they've said they're men, they will not get this ad. And then, of course, you can double check things by having a relevant question. So asking people where they're from. So I had to exclude a very small amount of people who were supposed to be in Greece, but then when they completed the survey, they told me that they were actually living in a different country. So I excluded those, for example, from the analysis. But it's as good as any survey online for better or worse.
Okay, thank you for this clarification. Good. Given that there are no other hands raised, I think we can conclude the session here. I would like to thank the speakers, Olga, Kostas, and Michael, very much for sharing their insights. It was really, really useful to hear your first-hand experiences in these special times. I would also like to thank all the participants for their attendance, and I hope to see you next week on the second week lunch panel. Okay, have a good
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Bye.